Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is a game that I did not expect to still be hearing about in 2022. I actually remember when this game came out back in 2013, and I don't recall it making that big of an impact at the time, though I wasn't on Twitter back then, so that might explain it. Metal Gear Rising is a game that seems to have only become more culturally relevant with age, and maybe I'm referring to the politics there, but mostly I'm just referring to the memes.
Exquisite.
But this is going to be my first time actually playing it, and after DMC5, my character action game standards are pretty damn high. So let's get started with this review of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Now, there are several things to know before you watch this review. 1. I have played a grand total of 0 Metal Gear games besides this one. Well, technically I played a few hours of MGS5 because it was free on PS Plus a few years back, but besides that, my knowledge of the franchise is essentially nothing. So if you want me to talk about the history of this game or what it contributes to the overarching narrative of Hideo Kojima's fever dream, you're gonna be disappointed because this is more or less my first time experiencing this franchise. 2. This video is going to be full of spoilers, but to be honest, the entire internet is full of spoilers for this game. Memes from this game seem to just be woven into the fabric of the modern internet, so I'm not gonna worry too much about holding anything back for spoilers in this video. 3, I'm mostly gonna refer to it as MGR because it reminds me of DMC, and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is way too much of a mouthful to say over and over again, so it's gonna be either MGR or Metal Gear Rising. And finally, each section will feature its own MGR character as a drill tweet, complete with a bad impression of each. Please enjoy.
Getting more pain receptors implanted into my skin. Maybe now my post will actually mean something to you motherfuckers. Ah!
So apparently this game takes place at the very end of the Metal Gear timeline, which kind of intimidated me at first. Like, I wasn't sure if I was gonna need to know Big Boss's 15th clone's blood type and favorite Middle Eastern geopolitical conflict. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like it. The story is pretty self-contained and self-explanatory. We start with Raiden as he's working security for the president of some unnamed African country. The wiki literally calls it Mani's country and says that the country possessed a coastline. So, that narrows it down. Mani is clearly one of the good guys and is generally doing a good job of restoring peace to a recently war-torn region, which, of course, does not sit right with this guy, Sundowner.
I want him dead.
Immediately, I love this character. He absolutely tickles me, even though, as an American, I feel like I'm being mocked more than a little here. His uncanny valley face and lip sync, combined with his rants about how great the war economy was, are so weird and so funny that I can't help but love it.
How's an honest warmonger supposed to make a living?
Sundowner kidnaps the president of Africa and sicks a Metal Gear Ray on Raiden. Now, immediately, I thought this was going to be a supposed-to-lose fight. I don't know much about Metal Gear games, but I know that Metal Gears themselves are kind of a big deal, so I assumed that this thing was gonna whoop my ass, but Raiden actually demolishes this thing with some of the coolest, most over-the-top set-piece moments I've ever seen in a game, period. We're 20 minutes into the game, by the way, and Raiden has already thrown a Metal Gear into the air and sliced it in half in midair. But the key moment of this mission is still to come. After fighting a massive robot, it's time for the real boss fight. A Brazilian man with a ponytail and a sword with a gun sheath. This is Jetstream Sam, and while you might be thinking that he doesn't look like he should be a bigger threat than a Metal Gear, as we all know from Dragon Ball Z, it is always way cooler to have the boss's strongest form be the smallest and simplest version of him, and Jetstream Sam shows how awesome that trope is. Now, the point of this fight is not to win. The point is to show you that Raiden is not strong enough, not cyborg enough, and definitely not edgy and cool enough to hang with the big boys. Cyber Yasuo chops his arm off and is about to finish Raiden when Raiden's pals come to rescue him. Don't really see why these dudes in APCs would be a threat to Sam when these dudes in APCs weren't, but I digress. Jetstream Sam's introduction here is a classic rival setup, the tried and true trope of the early game's supposed to lose fight, and one of the most effective versions of it that I've played. It's a loss that works on multiple levels. The only thing worse than the brutal physical loss for Raiden is the ideological loss. Sam's casual dismissal of all of Raiden's offense, combined with his scathing accusation that Raiden isn't fighting for the right reasons.
You deny your weapon its purpose. It yearns to bathe in the blood of your enemies, but you hold it back.
Raiden is physically weak, but moreover, according to Sam, he's morally weak. A hypocrite who claims to protect the innocent, but won't acknowledge the true purpose of a sword, which is to kill people. This is a theme that gets explored more later, but this setup for it is really, really great. Now, this is where Raiden gets his new cyborg body, and we gotta talk about Raiden himself a little more here. Raiden is trying so hard to be cool. He's got a cyborg eye patch, a cyborg body, cyborg high heels with claws, white hair, a cool visor. I literally don't think there are any more cool anime character tropes to slap onto this guy. He's so overly cool that he loops back around to looking like a dork again, which weirdly kind of works for me. He's also clearly trying really hard to have like a gruff badass voice, but he just sounds like a prepubescent kid trying to do his best Batman impression.
I don't care who thinks I'm right. And I've got cause enough for killing you.
It's kind of adorable. He's incomprehensibly powerful when it comes to throwing robots and slicing up cyborgs, while simultaneously being a huge loser who's nowhere as cool as he thinks he is. And after recovering and getting his new, way edgier cyborg body, Raiden gets to work taking down the cyborg mercenaries of the PMC Desperado, each mission serving to introduce a new weirdo to fight and move the plot forward with more and more ridiculous plot developments. Mission 1, the first level is Mission 0, Raiden hunts down some terrorist guy who doesn't matter and is completely forgettable compared to Mistral, the French Spider-Woman boss of this level. Mission 2 has Raiden infiltrate a Mexican lab where they're harvesting children's brains to train them in VR to be cyborg soldiers, and the rest of the missions have him fighting through the streets of Colorado to rescue the child brains, attempt to stop a false flag assassination attempt on the President of the United States to prevent World War III, have a fair and honorable fight with Jetstream Sam to show that Raiden's ideology is truly superior, and finally, fly to Pakistan on a rocket to take on the man who started all of this in the first place, the most Chad video game villain of all time, Senator Armstrong.
Don't fuck with this, Senator!
Yep, that's right. In the final, hour of the game, the ultimate villain is revealed to be a United States senator who wants to reinvigorate America's economy by starting a war, and furthermore, use that conflict to get himself elected president so he can create his perfect objectivist utopia where everyone is truly free. But of course, Armstrong's promises of freedom are ultimately hollow. Armstrong claims to want everyone to be free, but all he really wants is freedom for the strong to subjugate the weak.
The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive, free to live as they see fit. They'll make America great again!
He praises Raiden for having the strength to oppose him, to fight for what he believes in, because Armstrong believes that might makes right, and that's all that matters for his vision of the world. He wants to burn down America as it exists now, and let those with the will and strength to rebuild it to do so as they see fit. Now, I think all that should make it pretty clear that this game is pretty political. To argue otherwise is just kind of naive, but people online do still argue that the Metal Gear games aren't political. Why? It's in large part due to the fact that the narrative satisfaction people get from this game and why it resonates so much with people doesn't really have that much to do with its political plot. You know, any description of this game's plot is going to make it sound like a political movie or a spy thriller where the satisfaction comes from uncovering the grand conspiracy and seeing the pieces fall into place in this elaborate plot. But all of that is mostly set dressing. Yes, the plot of the game is a convoluted web of politics, private military corporations, terrorism, and conspiracies, but that isn't really what the story of the game is. This is a revenge story. Yeah, crazy, right? I'm a friggin' genius. Look at me, I read the title of the damn game. So yes, the overarching plot has a lot to say about society, but the story is more your cut and dry, classic cinematic revenge tale. Think Kill Bill crossed with RoboCop by way of Mega Man. MGR introduces a rogues gallery of colorful villains and structures the story in such a way that the constantly escalating stakes complement the higher difficulty and increasingly ridiculous set pieces. And it uses that structure to examine how our main character is changed by this revenge quest. And it works really, really well. The stakes are massive in scope, what with the World War III and the child organ harvesting, but the story manages to stay focused on Raiden's internal struggle to keep his morality while seeking revenge. His morals are constantly being called into question throughout the story.
It spared you the burden of all the lives you've taken, absolved you of guilt when you enjoyed it.
Jetstream Sam needles him incessantly for being a hypocrite, and he isn't necessarily wrong. Raiden starts the story suppressing the part of himself that just wants revenge, the part that enjoys violence, and has to balance that part of himself that stems from his childhood trauma with his current sense of justice, his desire to protect the weak. Monsoon tries to use the power of magnets and memes against him, and Armstrong tries to genuinely convince Raiden that starting a war is a cool thing to do. I really do love that in the final battle, Raiden tries to use Talk no Jutsu on Armstrong, and Armstrong just Uno reverse cards that shit right back at him.
All of it!
He ends up infecting Raiden with his memes, in a way. Armstrong wanted a world where every man would be free to fight his own wars, a world where might makes right, and Raiden ultimately plays into Armstrong's hands by giving into his desire for revenge. The lyrics of the song that play over the final battle. Raiden is ultimately acknowledging here that he's not winning over Armstrong because he's fighting for justice. He doesn't win because he's good and Armstrong is evil. He wins because he's stronger than Armstrong. Armstrong wants
A nation of action, not words ruled by strength, not committee!
And Raiden has more strength than Armstrong. Revengeance, and yes, it is a real word, revengeance is what Raiden is fighting for when he defeats Armstrong. Raiden goes on this quest for revenge and comes out the other side a changed man. In the epilogue, Raiden is revealed to be using his strength to impose his will on the world. He's got no oversight, no committees, no rules restraining him anymore. He's free to fight his own private war against the military-industrial complex. Or at least fight a war against some cyborgs who I guess we can assume are bad guys. It seems like he's kept his sense of justice, but he's using Armstrong's philosophy for good, and that is where Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance ends.
I've got my own war to fight.
When this game's story is in its element, it is nothing less than completely captivating. An absolutely bonkers theme park ride of absurd plot developments, writing that wouldn't sound out of place in an average episode of Captain Planet, and real-life subject matter so dark that it feels genuinely shocking to see it dramatized this way. Armstrong's superpowers are explained away with a single line.
Nanomachine, son!
He refers to his dream for a new utopia as the ultimate omelet, and he claims that his super strength comes from playing college ball for the University of Texas.
Played college ball, you know.
All of this without a hint of irony. The absurd and over-the-top dialogue is part of what makes this such a powerfully enduring meme game. Take any of these fucking insane lines and find and replace whatever nouns you want, and boom, you've got a SpongeBob version of Senator Armstrong's little I Have a Dream speech.
The truth, then. I do want your formula. Wanna or what? I have a dream.
And can I just say that I'm not trying to cancel Platinum Games or accuse them of racism or anything, but I have to point out the absolutely bonkers optics of a white politician with nanomachine superpowers that turn his skin jet black, going on about his vision for America while quoting MLK.
Whoa! Is that fucking blackface, dude?
It is just really something else. At the end of the day, though, beneath all of the ridiculousness, Metal Gear Rising has a lot to say, both in its story of how revenge changes its main character and in its broader political themes. It explores a lot of those themes with all of the subtlety and tact of a 2011 John Cena promo.
Osama bin Laden.
But that's kind of the charm. and Raiden's character arc is surprisingly nuanced. This game's plot is over the top to the point of absurdity, but the politics here are not stupid. Metal Gear Rising makes it very clear that while Armstrong is a bad guy and the things he's trying to do will cause immeasurable suffering, he is not the sole culprit of all the world's evil. This game is an indictment of the systems that humans have made in our real world that allow people like Armstrong to thrive and commit evil. And as cartoonish as it is to harvest child brains and brainwash them in VR into becoming cyborg super soldiers, let's not forget that Armstrong's main evil plot hinges on a false flag attack to start a war. A real thing that has really happened in the real world. And even once he's defeated, the game makes it clear that the world's problems are not all magically solved with the death of one evil man. The systems he used to seize power and exploit people are very much still in place after his death, and there's at least one edgy anime boy still out there fighting the good fight. Like, goddamn, have the Metal Gear games always been this fucking based? I'm genuinely asking, cause I never played them. I just thought they were about a cool guy with an eye patch and his weeaboo boyfriend. Is that accurate? I don't know. And also, is based played out? Is that old? Am I old for saying that? The themes in the final mission are especially on point. Politicians in the ruling class can't be trusted. Giving the strong the freedom to oppress the weak is wrong. Warmongering is bad. War profiteering is bad. Swords are fucking cool. And there will always be powerful people who seek to benefit from the suffering and dehumanization of regular people, and the best way to deal with them is to rip their still beating hearts out of their fucking chests.
The US Army sent my police department 100,000 hideous robot arms to rip off citizens' heads, but here's the thing, we only need like 500 of them.
So, after all of that, we're finally getting to the real meat of things, the combat. Combat starts out relatively simple. X is your light attack, Y is heavy attack, and you can string them together in different orders to get different combos. All pretty typical stuff. Once you've worn down an enemy's defenses with normal attacks, you can hold the left trigger to enter blade mode to chop up any parts of the enemy that are glowing blue. And if the whole enemy is blue and you've got a full meter of fuel cell energy, you'll go into super slow-mo and be able to slice and dice to your heart's content. This is one of the coolest unique selling points in any game ever, and it's frankly a technical marvel that it works this perfectly. You can chop off various limbs and enemies will keep fighting without them. You can bisect a man vertically and both halves will stumble backwards independently before falling over. And you can dice up almost any object in the world and it'll split perfectly, just like my Japanese anime. It never stops being entertaining to kick a cyborg into the air and just hack them into ground beef. That's maybe the most psychotic sentence I've ever uttered apart from Sonic Unleashed is a good video game, but it's true. I've probably spent about an hour in this game just standing around, slicing physics objects, and just admiring this system. This should just be a standard feature for any game that features a sword. It's just endlessly entertaining. The key to getting precise cuts is to rotate the stick around the angle you want and simply release the stick back into the middle. Don't be like me on my first playthrough and try to trace the path you want to cut. It really doesn't work like that. This is super important during certain boss fights, and once you've got it down, it's pretty satisfying to make those precise cuts. You can also just move your view around with the left stick and mash X and Y over and over, since most of the time precise cuts aren't actually needed, and it's just as much fun to slice your enemies into thin Buggy the Clown ribbons. But if you cut through the gooey center of your target, you'll have the opportunity to perform a Zandatsu, reaching into the enemy and ripping out their spine made of energy drink, completely refueling your fuel cell energy and health. You know, it's funny, I remember Doom 2016 getting a lot of due credit for its genius glory kill system, and it was the first place that I personally had heard of a mechanic like that. The 90s had health packs, the 2000s had regenerating health, and I was under the impression that Doom was the one to start the enemies as health pack renaissance. But no, a whole 3 years earlier, MGR was doing glory kills, and an even more extreme version of it at that, healing you back to full health and full meter with a single Zandatsu. This game is all about high risk, high reward, and keeping up with the breakneck pace of combat. The system also has a very real effect on the feel of combat. The fact that every weak enemy is just a walking health pack makes you view them very differently. In a bad game, a few scattered weak enemies are at best uninteresting and at worst a little annoying. In Devil May Cry, basic enemies are a chance to get some jump canceling practice in and style on some weaklings for fun. And in MGR, the weak enemies are juicy targets, the weak members of the herd to be sought out and feasted upon. And even though the animation itself can get a little repetitive, the combat is so fast-paced that it's nice to have a quick moment to breathe, to reset and take stock of what's around you and see how hard you're about to get clobbered by the frozen enemies around you. MGR and DMC are both games about using swords to hit enemies, but the systems that they use evoke entirely different feelings. Where Devil May Cry emphasizes style, MGR is all about aggression. There's a reason Raiden's alter ego is Jack the Ripper, a serial killer who preyed on the weak and sliced up his victims in brutal fashion. Yeah, it's not exactly subtle, but it's fun, so who cares? This also brings up Raiden's Ripper mode, which unlocks during Mission 3 in the Monsoon boss fight. Ripper mode greatly increases your damage and lets you sever limbs and chop enemies into pieces without needing to enter Blade mode. The damage increase is so huge that it can kind of end up feeling like a free win at times. You'll be able to take down really tough enemies so fast that you don't even need to parry them at all, even on higher difficulties. I think the main reason you wouldn't want to do this all the time is that your score is going to be a lot lower, but personally I've never cared about getting a good score as long as I beat the level. Plus, using it does come with some risks besides your end of level ranking. Being in Ripper mode draws from the same fuel cell energy that you need to use Zandatsu, and can only be activated when your meter is completely full. Not only does it drain your fuel cell meter the whole time you're using it, you kill enemies so fast that it can be hard to perform Zandatsus to refill your health and fuel cells. But if you're quick enough and paying attention, you can chain back-to-back Zandatsus while staying in Ripper mode the whole time. Using Ripper mode feels strategic in a way that a lot of other action games don't, and it really plays into the sort of hyper-violent, spree-killer gameplay fantasy that they're going for, but more on that in a little bit. There is a shop where you can buy more moves and various base stat upgrades, which is pretty typical for this kind of game, but then you get into the more unique stuff. There's a lot of main weapons you can unlock, but a lot of these require you to complete certain objectives like VR missions, and most of them are gimmicks that seem to be more for messing around if you've gotten tired of the main game. The Foxblade is super expensive and seems like a good idea, but it's basically a cheater mode, and it's honestly not that much fun to use. It just kills everything in one hit, and it doesn't let you do any combos. It's kind of boring, actually. I didn't worry about any of these alternate swords, and I just focused on using Raiden's default sword for my first playthrough, and then using Sam's Murasama blade as my main weapon for all subsequent playthroughs. And I think that's generally considered the right way to play the game, as far as I can tell. Though, obviously, do whatever you want. I'm not the boss of you. Also, don't forget to buy the dodge move. You know, I was gonna make fun of this more, but then I remembered you don't even get dodge roll until like halfway through Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, so I'll let this one slide. As you proceed through the levels and beat the bosses, you'll unlock the various bosses' weapons to use for yourself. This is a classic video game trope, and I basically always like it. It's just really fun to use weapons that have been used against you. I don't know, it's just a good trope. Mistral's weird polearm thing is best for crowd control and has the most combos. Monsoon Sai is effectively a grappling hook that stuns enemies, and Sundowner's Scissor Blade, like my Japanese anime. It's a slow weapon that does massive damage and gives you super armor while swinging it. You don't get it until near the end of the game, so there's barely any time to get used to it, or really any of these weapons on your first playthrough, but come on. We all know you're supposed to play these games over and over and over on higher and higher difficulties. That's like the whole point. I also like that on my second playthrough, I found that each boss's own weapon happened to work really well against them. That's kind of a neat touch. The biggest letdown with these is that they completely replace your heavy attack and they can't be swapped out on the fly. Like, there's several unused D-pad buttons that could easily have swapped through your sub-weapons, but instead you use those to open up the menu and switch them out, and it just ruins the pace and flow every time you have to open the menu. I have to assume this just came down to either hardware limitations or time, so I'm not going to be too hard on them, but man, imagine the combo possibilities here if you could use all of them without needing to pause. I really do think this game could use some kind of definitive edition re-release just to fix some of this stuff just for quality of life. Equipment is even more disappointing. You've got 2 different rocket launchers, multiple types of grenades, all of which require you to completely stop and slowly aim them all to accomplish basically nothing. The game, I don't think, even tells you that you can quickfire them by double tapping the right bumper, so yeah, who cares about these?
The professor said our assignment is to make a meme? I've got this shit on lockdown. I pump my fist and hop on my hideous adult tricycle.
Now, there is one major feature that I've been avoiding up till now, but I can't put it off anymore, and that is parrying. This is really the mechanic that the entire combat system is built around. The marketing for this game would have you believe that it's blade mode, but no. Parrying is the real core mechanic here. Parrying an enemy blocks all the damage from their attack, and perfect timing will let you do a counterattack that will immediately set them up for a Zandatsu. And the animation and visual effects and sound effects make it super satisfying to hit a parry, even more so than royal blocks in Devil May Cry, and that's a high bar to clear. And for almost my entire first playthrough, I absolutely hated this mechanic. At best, the parrying is poorly explained, and at worst, the explanations they do give you can feel deliberately misleading. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but the phrase "follow the direction of the enemy's attack" is so vague that it's practically meaningless. So at first I tried holding the stick towards the enemy's attack itself, meaning if they were in front of me but swinging from the left, I'd hold the stick to the left and hit X. That didn't work, so alright, it must just mean towards the enemy, so I held the stick towards the enemy and that worked like 50% of the time. Because that method tended to accidentally work sometimes, I ended up thinking, well, okay, I know how this works now, my timing is just off. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't block multiple attacks in quick succession, and if I was already holding towards an enemy and tried to block, nothing would happen. What the hell is going on here? Am I just this shit at this game? Eventually, I hit a wall known as Jetstream Sam, and this is the moment where I finally got frustrated enough to just ask the internet. And then finally, the Scroll of Truth, the Ark of the Covenant, the Reddit comment thread that finally told me how to play this game from 10 years ago. And you just tap the stick, dummy. Yeah, you have to tap the stick towards the enemy and hit X at the same time to initiate a block. If the enemy attacks again from the same direction, you need to return the stick to neutral and tap it towards the enemy again. Each block basically requires a discrete tap of the stick and press of the X button. That's it. It sounds stupidly simple now that I see how it works. Am I just stupid for not figuring this out on my own? Well, maybe I am. It's not like the parry system is itself overly complex. A little unusual, sure, but it's not like it's a mechanically difficult maneuver. You tap the stick towards the enemy and you hit a button at the same time. Seems pretty cut and dry when you put it like that. The problem is that it's basic enough that you can accidentally do it a lot without actually knowing how it works. And that's fine until the game starts actually demanding you to execute a lot of parries in a row. If you get the wrong idea of how it works, you won't know how wrong you are until you get to Jetstream Sam, who is basically impossible if you have an even slightly incorrect understanding of the parry system. And as you can see, the game's explanations are, let's be nice and say they're less than helpful. And even if you go online for help, you aren't guaranteed to get any good info. There are so many terrible explanations for how this shit works online. Even in old threads of people asking for help with the game, there are people who claim to know what they're talking about, explaining it completely wrong. Just stand still and hold the directional key towards the enemy and time your attacks to line up with theirs. That is so wrong. The word hold should not be anywhere near any explanation for the parries in this game. Do you want to die to Jetstream Sam? Because that's how you die to Jetstream Sam. I really specifically don't like these parry tutorials. Doctor tells you to parry by using a light attack of your own. Boris says something similar. That is literally as misleading as it could possibly be. That makes you think that if you see a light attack of your own come out, that it should be parrying the attack, but that isn't how it works. And it wouldn't be crazy to assume that it might work like that. Most fighting games have to have a mechanic for dealing with two hitboxes colliding at the same time. Dragon Ball FighterZ calls them clashes, Super Smash Bros. Calls it a rebound, and action games sometimes have this too. Kingdom Hearts 1 parries work this way, and DMC5 actually added a system like this for the first time in the series. Systems like this reward the player for staying on the offensive by giving attacks a small amount of defensive utility as well. But in Metal Gear Rising, if your attack animation collides with an enemy's attack, you will be the one getting hit every time. A system like this might have worked for MGR, but as it stands, the blocking system is actually quite good, but I don't think it acts the way the game seems to imply, and it's probably better for it. Now, I've heard this game described as pure offense, your offense is your defense, but I think that's only true once you've dedicated a pretty significant amount of time to this game. People talk about MGR as if you're encouraged to just keep relentlessly attacking and your defense will sort of come along with good offense, but I think new players going in with that sort of expectation are gonna end up having a bad time. Because blocking is still a decision you have to make, not a reward the game hands out if you're just playing aggressively enough. Tapping the stick towards the enemy and hitting X is not the same as holding towards an enemy and hitting X. Or what you're really supposed to do, locking onto an enemy and keeping the stick neutral while Raiden does the aiming. I mean, you could just keep tapping the stick the whole time you're in combat, but that just means you'll never get a perfect parry, and your thumb will probably be in a lot of pain, so I don't think anyone actually plays like that. Instead, what you're looking for is that feeling of flow. Because, man, when you're in the zone, once you've put 20 hours into playing and replaying these levels, you can really get into a good flow with this game. That's really the high that everyone is chasing with these kinds of high-skill action games. There's a reason both your dodge and parry involve hitting the X button, your main attack button. You'll get in the zone and you can just stop consciously thinking about what you're doing. You keep mashing X to attack, and seeing an enemy attack coming just triggers an automatic response to flick the stick towards them and parry, or tap A and X together to dodge their grab, and your defense and offense merge together into one pure stream of violence, and it feels so damn good. And then a rocket from off screen knocks you on your ass and brings your flow to a screeching halt. Oh well. When you get into that flow state, then normal enemy combat is highly aggressive, encouraging you to keep attacking, keep getting close to enemies, try to parry when you see an attack coming, but overall, not worrying too much about how much damage you take. Because as long as you manage to kill one enemy, you'll be able to heal back to full and keep your murder spree going. However, there's a fun change to that dynamic that happens during boss fights. Bosses are the final exam of each level. They're the big boys. They aren't fodder like normal enemies, so you actually have to treat the fights differently. The flow of combat during bosses is constantly shifting back and forth between offensive and defensive segments. It sometimes comes a little bit close to what I sometimes call minigame boss fights. I always use this fight as an example of a minigame fight, since jumping over colored lasers doesn't feel like an extension of the game's combat mechanics. It just feels like a minigame while you wait for the boss to be vulnerable again. But in Metal Gear, these phases are usually pretty short, and they're mostly rooted in the standard mechanics of the rest of the game, so they don't feel disjointed and out of place like, say, constantly being forced to hit switches around the arena every few seconds.
This is hard-hitting news, Bob!
So because bosses are actual challenges for Raiden, it makes sense that you have to play a little bit more defensively against them. Bosses love to get you in long combo strings, and once it's your turn to attack, your actual offense doesn't really need to be all that strategic. There's a lot of preset combos in MGR, but they all generally do the same thing, they just damage enemies. There's not much reason generally to use any one combo over another, so when you've got an opening on an enemy, you can just kind of mash buttons and something useful and cool will probably happen. The real skill expression comes in with parrying, since it's the only action that can interrupt almost any other action and is your main answer to almost everything a boss can throw at you. This is where MGR is at its best, when bosses are throwing out complicated and weirdly timed attacks for you to parry, like a Guitar Hero song with a particularly tricky but satisfying rhythm, or charging up massive attacks that you deftly parry with a single well-timed input. Normal enemies make you feel like a serial killer, like Jack the Ripper, but bosses force you to play like you're in a duel between highly skilled samurai, surviving their attacks while wearing their defenses down until you can strike the final killing blow. That killing blow usually coming in the form of an elaborate and completely buck-wild quick-time event at the end of each boss fight, which normally I wouldn't be a huge fan of in an action game, but the spectacle of these and the perfect music makes them enjoyable every single time. Sundowners is especially hilarious. I mean, this is some of the most anime shit you'll ever see, and I 100% mean that as a compliment. I love this contrast between carving your way through hordes of fodder before getting to the one worthy opponent at the end of every level who can only be killed by some wild Rube Goldberg combination of wacky shit. It is so addicting, and it makes this game incredibly replayable once you know what you're doing. And that can take a while because this game is hard. I used the word fodder earlier, but that doesn't mean normal enemies don't pose any challenge, because they definitely will slap the shit out of you if you let them. Flying enemies are especially annoying, mostly due to Raiden's lack of aerial mobility and aerial attack options. Plus, the camera is always kind of working against you when you're fighting flying enemies, because it's just way too close to Raiden's shiny metal ass. The big, Donkey Kong looking guys are also pretty aggravating on higher difficulties, because the game likes to send an entire barrel's worth of them at you, and they can stun lock your ass to death with their grabs. Only once you know what you're doing will that highly aggressive, flow-like combat fantasy start to work, but your first playthrough can be a pretty frustrating experience. They absolutely love to put rocket launcher guys everywhere that will take off massive chunks of your health with rockets from completely off screen. I already talked at length about parrying not being explained, but I also wish the game would explain the difference between attacks that can and can't be blocked. Unblockable attacks, both grabs and just really strong wind-up attacks, are highlighted yellow and normal attacks red, but this can be incredibly hard to differentiate on certain enemies and certain lighting. Plus, not every attack makes the enemy's limbs glow, so it's a little confusing the first time you play. Really, the right way to read enemies is by the glint in their eyes. This is generally a lot more consistent. Look into your enemy's eyes and you'll have a way easier time. Except for the fact that the spark here in the Metal Gear Excelsis fight is clearly yellow, and yet this attack is blockable. So really, it's a fucking free-for-all out here, and I just had to figure it out with trial and error, and you're gonna have to do the same. Thankfully, I had consumable items to help me, the most important of which is the Repair Nano Paste. You can hold up to 5 of these, and they're pretty common to find in levels. I actually really like how these work. They automatically restore you to 75% health when you run out of HP, and the number you have is displayed below the health bar. They're essentially extra health bars that you can pick up that don't halt the flow of gameplay, and importantly, don't make you feel like you're cheating like DMC's gold orbs. MGR bosses often straight up give you nano pastes or have them scattered around the arena to start, so the game definitely feels like it's intending for you to use these. And trust me, on either your first playthrough on normal or any of the higher difficulties, you're definitely going to be using these a lot. As is tradition for character action games, there are a bunch of higher difficulties. Hard, as far as I can tell, just increases enemy damage and health. It doesn't seem to change enemy behavior or the number of enemies. Very hard, of course, adds another level of enemy damage and health increase, as well as more challenging groups of enemies throughout. And finally, Revengeance, the most intense challenge where almost every enemy can one-shot you and they never stop attacking. Funnily enough, if you're going for a good score, Revengeance is definitely the most defensively oriented mode in the game. Kind of like Kingdom Hearts 2 Critical, it makes both enemies and Raiden do more damage, but Raiden's most damaging move is the parry counter. Your parries have to be completely on point for Revengeance, but if they are, you can absolutely shred bosses, making combos a lot less important than good blocking. But like I said earlier about Ripper mode, the real way to win without as much effort is to just stay in Ripper mode as much as you can and end fights as quickly as possible. That's fun too, but in a different sort of way. Honestly, Revengeance is not my favorite mode. Very Hard was probably the most fun playthrough I had. Weirdly enough, my first playthrough on normal was probably the most difficult one for me since I had no idea what I was doing, and I feel like my knowledge and skill at the game increased as I was playing faster than the difficulty level increased. Well, that and also the damage and health upgrades you get as you progress, those definitely help too. So Hard actually ended up feeling easier than normal, and Very Hard felt even easier than that. But still more satisfying, because I could tell how much better I was getting at the game. Revengeance is just so punishing with how much damage enemies do that all the things that are just kind of annoying normally, like off-screen rockets and flying enemies and getting stun-locked by all 5 members of the DK crew, they stop being annoying and become outright frustrating. I mean, I beat the game on Revengeance. It's not like it's impossible or anything, but I think when I replay the game, I'm probably gonna stick to very hard.
My tweets bring people together and unite this country even more than 9/11 did. Every time I post, it's like 9/11 happening again.
And now we have to talk about every non-combat aspect of gameplay in Metal Gear Rising. There's a completely pointless turret section of all things, but this was 2013, and I'm pretty sure forced turret sections in action games were basically government mandated back then. The other forced minigame section is this dumb little robot stealth section. It really feels like they wanted this thing to be a much bigger element than it is. You've got several moves and stealth takedowns with this thing, but all you actually have to do is walk to this hole in the wall and jump into it. That's it. The enemies in this section don't attack you unless you attack them first, and it truly is over and done in less than a minute. This is basically the DMC4 dice minigame of Metal Gear, obnoxious and unintuitive the first time you do it, and once you know how to do it, it's just 30 seconds of mindless busywork. Except DMC5 had about 500 of these, and Metal Gear has one, so props to Platinum Games for that, I guess. The stealth mechanics are so bare bones that they're barely worth mentioning. You can sneak up on enemies and do a hilariously over-the-top stealth kill, but it's genuinely just way less fun than fighting enemies the normal way. Thankfully, it is completely optional, so I just straight up never bothered. Plus, it barely fucking works. I mean, here I got spotted just as I was leaving the area, and the enemies spotted me and then disappeared. Fine, I guess, but to be honest, I just feel cheated out of a fight now. The most important thing to know about the stealth is that if you buy the mariachi outfit and go into the box or the barrel with the hat on, it sits on top. That's just wonderful. Other than that little tidbit, there's really nothing noteworthy about the stealth. Likewise with the level design, it's all just uniformly drab hallways or dull city streets. Honestly, this is an incredibly minor issue. It's not like there's any gameplay outside of fighting enemies, so the locations are mostly unimportant anyway. It would be nice if the locations had a little more visual interest, but as I understand it, this game managed to run at 60 FPS on consoles in 2013, so if the bare bones levels had anything to do with that, then it was probably worth it. Almost nothing about these levels outside of combat is worth noting, except that you do have to do a bit of looking around to unlock health upgrades and VR missions. Yeah, so I haven't mentioned these yet. There's all these VR missions with different challenges and mechanics, and no, fuck you. No, I'm not doing these. But look, Platinum Games, if you really think that I'm gonna voluntarily play more levels with your scuffed-ass stealth mechanics,
You've lost your mind.
maybe Devil May Cry has just spoiled me, but is there any secondary challenge mode in a character action game better than Bloody Palace? Who wants to play all of these stupid minigames? Seriously, this isn't Metal Gear Rising's fault, but why isn't Bloody Palace just an industry standard default mode in every game with melee combat? It should be like how every game for a while after Gears of War came out had a horde mode.
Swords is the only blade known to man.
Then of course there's the DLCs, Jetstream and Blade Wolf, both of which allow you to play a single long mission as each of the titular characters, Jetstream Sam and Wolf, as well as filling in some of their backstory. In Jetstream, there's actually some noticeable changes to the basic mechanics of the game. Sam has way fewer combos and no secondary weapons, but he can charge up all his heavy attacks for some really cool moves, and he's got better mobility than Raiden. Instead of Ripper mode, Jetstream has a taunt mechanic, which has got to be a nod to Devil May Cry. Though instead of coming with any point bonus or combo extension, taunting enemies with Sam enrages them, making them more aggressive and more vulnerable. In essence, it's a high-risk Ripper mode that you sort of inflict on enemies. It's a pretty cool idea. Parry timing felt a little more strict to me, enemies felt just a little bit more aggressive, the stealth mechanics are basically gone completely, and Jetstream's campaign overall is way harder than the base game. Jetstream is awesome. Full stop. Jetstream Sam feels great to play and offers a surprisingly different experience from the main game. It's still a ridiculous and fun ride, and it's got arguably the hardest boss in the entire game with Sam's fight with Armstrong. Genuinely, this fight was harder on hard mode than the majority of Raiden's campaign was on Revengeance. So Jetstream's DLC, very good. Now Blade Wolf. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I don't really care for this DLC. Nope, that is sugarcoating it. This DLC kind of sucks. Blade Wolf has an extremely limited moveset, and it seems like they were trying to push you to play more stealthily, but they forgot to actually, like, improve the stealth mechanics in any way, so Blade Wolf's campaign is just kind of a wet fart, and maybe that's a controversial opinion. I don't know. Let me know if it is.
We'd pour hot wax into the assholes of new Marines yelling, "Welcome to the Corps!" Can't do that anymore. This nation used to build railroads.
And finally, we have sound. The sound effects in this game are awesome. Attacks feel visceral and weighty, and every action has a perfectly fitting sound effect to go with it. From slow-mo Zandatsu activating, to Raiden ripping out spines, to deflecting bullets with Ninja Run. I have nothing but praise for the sound effects, but the real star here is the music. This soundtrack absolutely fucking rips. This might be in contention for the all-time best lineup of boss fight themes. For reference, my subjectively objective correct list of best boss fight music is, in this order, Undertale, Sonic Mania, Kingdom Hearts 2, Shovel Knight, and Doom Eternal. Metal Gear Rising would probably go about here. As a longtime Sonic fan, you know that when the cheesy butt rock starts playing during a boss fight, I am just all over that. And when the vocals come in during the final phase, it brings the entire fight to a perfect crescendo. And when you go back and listen to them again and hear that each boss's lyrics are written from their perspective, talking about their views and why they fight, it's all just so perfect. They went to great efforts here to make sure that every major moment in these fights was punctuated with just the right music at just the right time. My favorite song on the soundtrack? Honestly, it's probably Stains of Time. It's so fast and so brutal, and the guitar, look, I'm not a music guy, and this is gonna date me horribly, but it reminds me of Dragon Force, specifically playing Guitar Hero 3 in middle school and listening to Through the Fire and the Flames. That's what it makes me feel like, and it's great. Collective Consciousness is probably my close second. These are definitely ones I hear talked about a little less than It Has to Be This Way, which is funny to me because I know I'm not the first person to notice this, but It Has to Be This Way is definitely Raiden's song, right? Not Armstrong's. It mostly gets associated with Armstrong, but if you don't believe me, go back and listen to the lyrics. They fit what Raiden is thinking about Armstrong. Plus, in the Jetstream DLC, you fight Armstrong and his song is Collective Consciousness, because of course it is. With lyrics like this, it would be easy for someone to hear these and write them off as shallow and dumb and, I'm 14 and this is deep, but that just seems too cynical for me. Nothing about Metal Gear Rising ever feels anything less than completely earnest, wholly confident in its wild ideas and embracing the pure fun of its story. And the music is the same way, energetic and on the nose and always enhancing the moment it's playing over. The music and its completely unabashed sense of fun, I think, is sort of emblematic of why people love this game. Now, is Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance a perfect game? Absolutely not, and it's not going to be for everyone. The steep learning curve to the combat could easily put some people off, and I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that the game's plot is maybe a little too flippant with its dark subject matter. But clearly, this game means a lot to a lot of people, and now that I've played it, I'm happy to include myself in that group now. There's just nothing quite like Metal Gear Rising. It's a wholly unique experience that can really only be felt fully by playing the game. Watching memes is great and all, but this is a game that really deserves a playthrough if you're even slightly interested. And of course, now is a great time to get into this game. We're in something of a Metal Gear Rising renaissance. Hey, that's not a bad idea for the title of the sequel. Google Trends shows us that Metal Gear Rising is almost as searched for today as it was when it came out, and it's recently been having the most players on PC it's had since launch. What's going on here? Well, besides its easy memeability, I really don't have any idea. The internet is a strange and fickle place, and sometimes this stuff just happens. But it feels like in our ever more cynical and dystopian world, it feels good to play a game where the darkest problems of our world can be at least partially solved by being a ninja cyborg with a cool sword and beating the crap out of a big bad man. So, there it is. That's my review of Metal Gear Rising. Hope you liked it. Sorry this video took so long, but it has to be this way. See you next time.